everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm here to continue the story of Spoils of War, so come on in, sit back, and enjoy.
Think about me one more time before you go. Someday you'll know. Someday you'll know. You already know what I'm going to say. I've been feeling this way for far too long. And now you're gone. Took me away from all of my fears. Kept me away from all of my tears. Now you're gone. And now I'm lost.
Present. Pa Kou stared at Maina as she wiped her eyes. She couldn't imagine the pain and horror this woman must have felt as she sat in that cave with her husband after seeing her family slaughtered. She reached a shaking hand to wipe the tears forming in her own eyes as she let out a deep breath. I'm so sorry about your family. Nepal has never told me any of this, Pa Kou said. Maina nodded. He wouldn't want to either. It's a story that shouldn't be told. Just telling it to you already makes me relive it again. The pain, the horror of it, just kills me. To this day, whenever I see a young infant boy, all I see is my little baby brother in my arms, dead. Pa Kou watched as Maina's face broke into tears. She had no words to say, no comfort to this kind of wound. She watched as Maina picked up her hat and placed it on her head. I've taken up your time today. Perhaps tomorrow I could come back and I can finish the story, she asked. Pa Kou nodded. Please do. Goshen watched as the woman drove away in her car and turned back around to find her sister also staring with curiosity. When Lee found her gaze, both sisters walked up the stairs and into their mother's room. Their mother had changed into a blue dress and was brushing her hair in front of the mirror. They entered and closed the door behind them. They watched as their mother continued brushing, each stroke longer than the one before. I have been neglectful. I'm sorry, Pa Kou said. Gosheng looked up at her mother. No, Mom, it's understandable. You have been through a lot. So have you. What did she say to you? Lee asked. Pa Kou set the brush down and turned around to face them. She had a story to tell of your father, a story unlike any I've ever heard of. It turns out your father was a savior as well as being the perfect father and husband. There are a lot of things I've yet to learn from her, and she has still to finish her story. But I have found it to be somewhat comforting, a living tale of your father that I never knew. I always felt cheated about his past life. I didn't know much about it, and he never wanted to share. With this new take on life, I feel I can be a part of his life again. But pasts are what makes us, Mom. If we share everything with everyone, how can we be our own individuals? Lee asked. I know what you mean, Lee, and I don't expect you to share everything with your husband or with me. But someday, when you're reaching the end like me, you'll come to understand that everyone's past can help save someone's life. Kong entered his mother's house and found it to be dark and silent. He turned on the lights as his wife Bao followed him inside. He walked in and removed his jacket, looking and calling out for his mother. When Bao closed the door, they both walked into the kitchen and found her sitting at the table, wearing a blue dress with a candle burning. Kong put his hand up to stop Bao from entering as he walked forward and touched his mother's shoulders. Mom, are you okay? He asked. Pa Kou turned and smiled at him. Kong, it's you. What are you doing here? He knelt down and touched his mother's cheek. Why are you here in the dark? Are you all right? She turned her head and saw Bao standing in the doorway. She gestured for her to come in. What are you two doing here? We were worried, Mom, Bao said. Don't worry, I'm fine. Kong took his mother's hands and held them tight in his. He could see the tears that she'd been shedding, and inside his heart tore at the thought of her hurting all alone. Come on, Mom. Let's take you to bed. Kong came down the stairs and found Bao sitting on the couch with the TV on, but the volume down. He smiled and walked to sit down beside her, pulling her close to him. His eyes shifted to the family picture on the wall, where it held his father's smiling face, and he felt tears come to his eyes. How long would he have to suffer at a picture of him until the day it no longer hurt? How long would it be until he could think of his father without the fear of breaking down? Forever, it may seem, he answered himself. Are you okay? His wife asked. Nodding, he replied, Yeah, I am. It's just that whenever I'm here in the presence of my father's old pictures, I always end up feeling sad. She reached over and touched his face. It will take some time, I can promise you that. But it will heal, and you will be okay again. He looked at her with tears brimming in his eyes. Yes, but how long will it be before it goes away? His wife adjusted her position and took a deep breath. In the light, she looked like a small child, though she was nowhere near one. She was a beautiful woman with womanly curves, and with a mind of her own and a spirit that matched his. Kong, it doesn't really ever go away. It just doesn't hurt as much. With time, you can look at a picture, and it just won't be as bad, she said. He took one of her slender fingers into his hand. That's just the thing, Bao. I'm afraid that I will never be able to look at my father's picture and not feel that ache to have him here in my life. Just leave your heart open for him, Kong. He's always here. It was late at night when Pa Kou came down the stairs in her dark and quiet house. Her son and daughter-in-law had left hours ago, and she didn't even hear them go. A note was on the table saying they had gone, and that Bao had made a meal in the fridge for her. She walked into the kitchen and felt the stillness of the house around her, making it eerie almost, like a ghost. She reached over and turned the light. The yellow tile floor looked old as she stared at it. Everything about this house looked old, but it held so many memories for her. Napa decided this was the house for them to raise their children, and she still hated this home to this day. She never liked it for its old age and its creaky sounds. Late at night, when everyone was sleeping, the house played notes that made her shiver in the dark. When shadows crossed over the walls, it cast a haunting spell on her, and she always hid in the covers, afraid of what they brought with them. She pulled out a chair, and it squeaked against the floor, and when she sat down, it made a dying sound. She placed her hands on the green table and stared at the age spots on her hands, wondering when the last time she saw smooth skin. She looked up at the moon shining in from the window and took a deep breath, tears already filling her eyes. Pain struck her as she got up and walked to the living room, and when she came across the picture of her late husband, the tears poured out of her. Why'd you have to go so fast? Don't you know that I need you here with me? You promised to take care of me, and now I'm all alone with no one here, in this house that scares me. How am I to live forever by myself in a home like this without you? Pa Kou cried. Napa's smiling face stared back at her from behind her cricket smile. She took a deep breath and knelt down on the ground. Today, Maina came to see me. She told a dark story of you, a story that you never shared with me. It's not yet finished, Napa. I wonder how the ending will be like. Did you love her? Did you love me like you loved her? Is that why when you slept, you screamed out her name? She looked up at the picture. An exhausted sigh came from her mouth. It was no use speaking to walls and pictures. It wouldn't bring him back. It wouldn't make it easier for her to live. She got up, walked to the kitchen, and turned the light off. She stood there in the dark, watching as the shadows played over the couches, making it look like people were sitting there waiting for her to speak. The house groaned, and she closed her eyes, the hair on her back rising. She slowly moved her feet across the old tiled floor and up the stairs to her room, where she hid under the covers. It was early morning when Maina knocked on the door. Pa Kou opened it and welcomed her inside. Today she looked refreshed and young with her jeans and sweater, almost making Pa Kou feel envy against her youthfulness. She offered the woman a seat on the couch and then some tea and cookies. Nabal was strong until the end, never giving up. He was sick, but he never let it take over his life. Even on the last day, he managed to write letters to all of his children, Pa Kou said. Brain tumor, was it? Mayna asked. Yes. He was always brave, strong, and willing to give more than he received. I am here because of him. Pa Kou let out a breath and set her cup of tea down. Were you and my husband intimate? I think you already know the answer to that question, Pa Kou. She nodded, knowing the woman was right. I know, but I guess I just wanted to hear it from your lips. It's not easy for a wife to learn that her husband was with another woman, a woman whose name he spoke during his sleep. He must have been having nightmares of his past. That's where I belong, his past. You are and were his future. Yes, but it still hurts. I remember during one of his fits in his sleep, he screamed out your name, saying to watch out, to keep an eye open. I nudged him awake and he was quiet for a long time. When I asked him, he said it was nothing, that it didn't matter. It bothered me for days because I wasn't sure why he was hiding it from me. Mayna set her cup down and turned toward her. Pao was a great and wonderful man. Most of all, he was loving and gentle. He treated me with kindness and a softness that I never knew existed. He didn't have the strength to hurt anyone, especially not anyone he loved. I think the main reason for his not telling you was because he was afraid it would hurt you. Pa Kou shook her head as tears filled her eyes. Yes, but not knowing hurts more, especially when I heard him call out your name. It kept me thinking about who you were and what he had with you that he wouldn't tell me. Every time I brought it up, he shielded it away from me and he avoided it. Finally, I realized it could be because it was an affair. I told myself that it was because of me that he had to turn to someone else. She stopped as the fight entered her mind and caused her to tear up. She wiped her eyes and laughed. Look at me. I've been crying so much lately. It's my specialty. I'm so good at it. Please don't say that, Mayna said, but remained quiet for a moment. That day when I confronted him and said that if he was having an affair, I was so angry at him. He told me that it was nothing, a past of his past that had already died and it meant nothing. But now when I look at you, I have to wonder if he really meant it when he said it was gone. Mayna reached over and held her hand. We were together through our run for our lives, and then for a swift moment in Thailand before we both got separated. Our time together will never be forgotten, Pa Kou. Yes, we were both intimate together, but that doesn't hold a candle to the love that he gave to you, and the children he gifted to you. Pa Kou wiped her eyes. Can you finish the story, please?
You know it still hurts a little bit, but not that much. 'Cause if you want somebody else, who am I to judge? I've been thinking about you all the time, but that's alright. I'm starting to get used to it, think I'll survive. I met you in the summer, when you left it was cold.
1954. When morning arrived, Mayna and Pao crossed the river and the muddy terrains to a high mountain, where they found a small cave to hide out for the day. He emptied his bag and counted that he had several rice cakes left, enough to last them for a week, maybe less. Mayna walked out from the cave and stared across the green landscape and tears filled her eyes. So much lost for her in such little time. The land that her father was born in, raised, and loved had destroyed and ended his life in one single moment. She stood there watching as birds flew across the foggy atmosphere, and she wondered how great it would have been if she could be as free as that bird. To have such a wonderful feeling of safety, to fly across an open land with nothing to worry about. The wind blew across her face, and she shivered lightly, tears filling her eyes as she stared down at the village. Thatch houses were built for miles and miles. Rivers flowed through the small village, and she could see that it was empty and abandoned. People had fled for their lives, leaving their treasures behind, running for their lives. What are you thinking about? Pao asked as he came up behind her. She wrapped her arms around her body. Look at that village. It once held life for so many people, and now it is empty with nothing in sight. except memories of what once was. These communists, they take away our lives, and they take away our freedom because they can. They have no heart, no compassion for us. And what do we ever do except try to build a life? It's a fight for survival. We fight them and they fight us. But even with us, we may fight them, but we do it with pride. With them, they kill without mercy, slaughtering children as young as infants. You know nothing about slaughtering infants. My baby brother died in my arms, she said with thick emotion. Pao turned her around. And you think I'm a tourist in all this because I didn't hold a dead infant in my arms? My family was slaughtered like meat right before my own eyes. She became quiet as he stared at her. I'm sorry. He sighed and rubbed his neck. It doesn't matter. We should get some sleep. It's getting late and soon it will be dark. We'll need to run again. I really didn't mean it. I was angry, she whispered. He turned to her and reached out a hand to touch her but withdrew. It doesn't matter. War will make people say just about anything. What does that mean? It means I can even say I like you just for the hell of it because I know tomorrow I may die. I may not even mean it. Her eyes welled up with tears and she looked away quickly. Who would like me anyway? He reached out to touch her hand and she turned to look at him. I didn't mean it like that. I'm sure that the right man will love you one day. And then he smiled. Just don't go around kissing a bunch of boys to find him, okay? That I can't stand for. She wanted to laugh. Why not? He didn't answer her, but looked away, and she couldn't tell what he was thinking about. She was about to ask him to explain when a bullet flew right past her shoulder. She screamed for them to hide, but it was too late. When they both looked up, 7 soldiers with guns surrounded them. Mayna shook with fear as Pao pulled her behind him, as the men gathered closer together. One of them, she assumed it was a leader, walked forward chewing a toothpick in his mouth. He stared at her with his eyes and then laughed at them. Where do you think you're going? He said in his foreign tongue. Pao reached behind her and grabbed a hold of her hand. She gave it to him, fear riding deeper in her than she ever felt. The leader said something again, and this time the others came forward and tied their wrists in ropes, bound them behind their backs, and pushed them onward with them as they left. They traveled through the forest, and the insects ate Mayna's skin alive as they walked. The hot sun bathed her and she was sweating. Her hair stuck to her skin and her thirst was bigger than ever. They stopped at a small camp where the soldiers rested and set their guns aside. There were bamboo cages all around with locks. There were gray tents pulled all around. What's happening? Mayna asked. I don't know, Pao answered. The leader who had spoken earlier came to her and cut her ropes free, and then to her surprise, he reached out and groped her. She jerked and screamed as Pao came forward to stop him. He was hit in the head, blood gushing down his face, as Mayna's arms were grabbed by the leader. She fought him as he stared at her with his eyes and dirty smile. She brought up her hands to fight against him, and she earned a slap in return. Her cheek went numb as he laughed and then spit into her face. When he walked away, he gave Pao, who was down on the ground, a kick in the ribs. She bent down and helped him sit up. His face was bloody from the wound to his head. She turned him around and saw that the wound had been gashed open, but wasn't deep enough to cause an infection. Are you all right? Mayna asked with deep concern. Groaning, he replied, I'll live to kill those bastards. Did he touch you? She was speechless when she saw the concern in his eyes when he asked her that question. For that split moment their eyes locked and neither one said anything. She cleared her throat and shook her head. She reached for her pant leg and tore off a piece of fabric and tied it around his head. What do you think they're going to do to us? Mayna asked. I know exactly what they're going to do. They're going to rape you, kill you, and then kill me. She shuddered and sat back, her fear engulfing her. He turned to look at her pale face. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have put it that harshly, he whispered. It's the truth. One of the soldiers came and cut Pao's ropes off his wrist, then took him and tossed him into a bamboo cage and locked it. As he fought against the cage, he was hit in the face with a gun handle, and when Mayna tried to go to him, the leader came forward and pulled her by the hair. She groaned from pain as he dragged her toward the tent. No, no, Mayna, don't you touch her! Don't you dare touch her! He cried. Let me go! She cried as the tent came closer and closer into view. When she struggled against his hold, he turned her around and punched her The blow broke the tissue inside her cheek, and she tasted blood. Out of breath and out of strength, he dragged her into his tent and closed it up. When she turned around, he was smiling at her with his evil grin and slowly reaching for the buttons on his shirt. And then he knelt down and reached for her face. She bit his hand, and he howled, slapping her over and over. She fell over, panting hard as he examined his hand. He said something she couldn't understand and then left the tent. She pushed herself up to sit and took a deep breath as her shaking subsided. It wasn't until she heard silence outside that she opened up the tent. The soldiers were gone, except for one sleeping by a tree trunk. She walked over and found Pao sitting in his cage with eyes dreary. Mayna walked to sit beside him, and he looked up. "Did he hurt you?" he asked. Shaking her head, she answered, "No." "Oh, thank God, I was so worried that he had hurt you." She looked around. "Where did they go?" "They went to swim, I think. They left that one." "I have a plan." She turned her wide-open eyes to him as he inched forward closer to her. "What are you talking about? We could get killed. If we don't do something, we're as good as dead anyway. I need you to kill that guard and steal the keys from him and unlock this cage. We'll gather up whatever guns they have here and kill the rest. You can do it." Mayna stared at the guard sleeping by the tree trunk and shook her head. She turned her eyes back to Pao. "I don't think I can do that." He reached out and grabbed her hand. "Mayna, think of your life, okay? If you don't, he could be the one killing you. Now, you see that rock over there? Pick it up. It's heavy enough. You gotta kill him." She nodded and slowly stood up, walking to where the guard slept. She found the large rock, bent down, and picked it up in her hands, making her way toward the sleeping guard. She could hear his snores as she inched near him, and as she did, she saw the sparkling of the keys to Pao's freedom on his waist. She steadied her hands, held the rock right above his head. She turned to glance at Pao, who gave her a nod. She raised the stone above her head and then brought it down. The loud crack of his broken skull scared her as he startled awake and he fell over, his legs jerking as blood oozed from his head, and she brought the rock back up and down again and again until she had smashed his face into tiny bits of broken flesh. With shaking hands, she tossed the rock away and realized her hands were covered in blood and pieces of brains. She started crying and she wiped it against her shirt and grabbed the keys from his waist. She ran towards Pao's cage and opened it up and then threw her arms around him, crying. It's okay, you'll be okay. I'm here now," he whispered. He released her and went to gather up the guns. There were 2 rifles and 1 automatic handgun. He handed the handgun to her, and she took it with shaking hands. He took her hand, and they left the camp. They traveled through the forest, and when they heard laughter from the soldiers, they both ducked down in the bushes. The 6 soldiers had stripped and were now in the water, splashing and swimming. Pao raised his rifle and aimed it at them. Mayna stopped him. "What are you doing?" He turned to look at her. "If we don't kill them, they'll follow us once they get back to find their man killed and us gone. It's either us or them." "They won't know, Pao. Let's just go." Pao's eyes widened, and he stopped talking and then hushed her. "Do you hear that?" "No, I hear nothing." "Exactly." They both turned to the river and realized it was empty. Mayna's heart started pounding as she reached for the handgun in her waist. He instructed her to stay where she was, and he got up to go to the river. She hid there, in the bushes, waiting for anything when she heard the shots fired. She stood up, and that was when she felt the hand around her neck from behind. She screamed as the hand tightened and brought her down to her knees. Mayna clutched the gun in her hand and turned it toward her attacker. She pulled the trigger and felt pieces of brain splattered on her shoulder as blood oozed down her shirt. She gasped for breath as the hand let her go, and she stood up realizing it was a leader who had tried to rape her earlier. She had shot him in the temple and had blown his head wide open. With shaking hands, she turned around as the shots down below got more intense. She climbed over a bush and fell. The handgun dropped from her hand and into the water. "Oh no," she whispered. She heard a scream from behind her and turned to look as a soldier came forward, a knife in one hand. She screamed as bullets entered his body and he slouched forward onto hers. "Help me!" Mayna cried. When she looked up, Pao was standing before her and took the dead body off of her, helped her to stand, and pulled her in for a hug. When he pulled away from her, he reached over and touched her face. They stood there, drenched in blood, in the mid-afternoon sun, staring at each other. finally coming to terms with the feelings they had been hiding for one another. Present. Pa Kou sighed as Maynard took a sip from her cup. So it was true, she thought. Her husband did love her, like the kind of love she'd never known about. She tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear and stared up at the picture of her husband smiling. Pain and betrayal struck at her heart. She sobbed lightly. She felt a hand on her shoulder, and when she looked up, Maynard was staring at her with soft eyes. Please don't cry, Maynard whispered. Pa Kou stood up and walked to the window, wrapping her arms around herself, not sure what to say. She stood there for several moments, watching the little kid cross the street from across her house. He loved you. Yes, he did, but not the same way he loved you. She turned around, her eyes fierce with anger. Not the same way he loved me? The love he felt for you was deeper than the love he had for me. He cared about everything of you. Have you forgotten that you were his wife? I was just his past. She laughed, and then she sank down to the ground. You know, I used to tell myself that I had the perfect husband, that no one could be more perfect. The very first time I heard him cry out your name in his sleep, it cut me more deeply than if I had known he was having an affair. I was competing against a woman he had in his dreams, someone I had no idea about. Do you know how much that hurts? And then to wake up one day and see that woman here before me, to realize how beautiful she actually really is. It isn't just a dream anymore, it's reality. Pa Kou stood up. Would you mind leaving me? I think I've had enough today. You can come back another time to finish the story. I'm really tired. Chu pushed open his mother's door, and his siblings entered with him, followed by his sister's children. The house was cold, and he walked to turn on the heat as his wife and Blia walked into the kitchen. He rubbed his hands together and followed her. The kitchen was empty, and they both returned to the living room where Lee's husband, Kehm, was unbuckling his daughter from the car seat. Where's Mom? Lee asked. She's not in the kitchen, Blia answered. Gushing sighed and rubbed her head. She handed her sleeping son to her husband Tong and gestured for her sister to follow her upstairs. Both sisters went up as Chu came to sit down on the couch. He noticed the letters bunched up in the mailbox outside the living room window and got up. When he returned with the letters, he sorted them out. Magazines, flyers, bills, and then a white envelope addressed to his mother from a law firm. The postmark date read it had been sent 3 days ago. He sent the other letters down and tore it open. Inside was a one-page typed from the law firm, and the next 2 pages were written in his father's handwriting. Dear Mrs. Lee, my name is Attorney Curtis James. I had the pleasure of working with your husband just a few weeks before he passed. He instructed me to send this letter to you after he was buried. From all of us at James and Peterson, we are sorry for your loss. Chu stared at the black ink on the notebook paper that his father had written on. His handwriting bounced against the pages and came to life as Chu read the letter. My dearest Pa Kou, I believe the time has come for me to put everything in order, as they say. I can feel my strength draining away from me. Even as I sit here in this hospital bed and write, I feel tired, exhausted. I am exhausted from fighting this long battle that I know I cannot win. There's still so much to tell and so much to say, but I regret that time has other things for me to do. First of all, and above all, I love you with everything I hold dear. All of my love, I gave it to you the day I married you. My love comes from a place where no one can reach and no one will ever know. It is the kind of love that even after 1,000,000 years of separation, I still find you and love you again. That is how much I deeply cherish you, Pa Kou, for you are my life and my purpose in life. I have lived a very empty life up until I met you. All I knew was to run and to survive, to make things more perfect than when I found it. And until I found you did I realize that perfection wasn't a way to live my life. Being perfect was not how I was to live. You taught me that. And so much more. You taught me that by giving you my love, I became whole for the first time. Not only did you bless me with your love, but you blessed me with our children, the 4 main people in my life who give me the ability to do more than I can. I don't think this is goodbye, Pa Kou. This is just a little detour for now, until we meet again. The road to my heart is always open, and you are the only one who has the key. For you, this little detour should never stop you from coming back to me. All roads lead to me, and you will find me in everything. Ju looked up as his sisters came down the stairs with their mother behind them. His face broke into tears as he ran to his mother and held her. Both sisters looked at him with questioning eyes as he pulled away and handed the letter to her. His mother was confused as she took it and read it. When she was done, she simply dropped the letter to the ground and held Chu like the small child he once was again. The room was dark as Chu stood in his bedroom. His wife was sleeping on the bed as he looked out the window. Thoughts of his father's last words lingered in his mind as he watched the headlights disappear into the night. He heard a stir and turned to find Blia making her way toward him. She came to stand behind him and wrapped her arms around his waist, pulling him close. They stayed like that for several long moments before he turned around and kissed her gently. "Are you all right?" she asked. Nodding, he replied, "I'm just thinking about the letter my father wrote to my mom. Sometimes I wonder how powerful it must have felt to have loved the way he did." She smiled and touched his face. "It feels great, Chu. You make me feel that way every day." A smile graced across his face as he took her hand and led her to sit down on the bed. "Did you know that growing up, he always told me that in life, the purpose of a man is to love one woman with all of his heart?" "No?" He laughed, remembering the conversation he had with his father. "He did. He said for a boy to be a real man, it's not about growing up or growing old or even being mature. It's loving one woman for the rest of your life with all of your heart and giving everything to her. It's the purpose in a man's life." Blair turned his face around to meet hers. "And you have given me everything in this life, Chu. You have, and more. He would be so proud of you." He shook his head. "But I wonder how it feels to have felt the way he did. So much power, so much life inside you that is ready to burst. I envy him for that. But you have given me a reason to live my life. And I love you for that, Chu. You have done a lot for me that I never thought a single man could." He turned to face her. "Really?" "Of course." He smiled and leaned down to kiss her gently as the roaring of the cars stilled outside. Thank you for tuning in. Chapter 3 will be out shortly.
Think about me one more time before you go. Someday you'll know. Someday you'll know. I already know what I'm going to say. I've been feeling this way for far too long.